She sits very still at the edge of the hive box, a pencil tucked behind one ear, a small notebook open on her knee. One worker climbs the comb, angles her body, trembles, and begins to dance. The movement is quick, exact. She turns, waggles, points. The beekeeper watches the angle, traces it with the pencil. Again, again. The same line, drawn on the page like a compass needle, refusing to move. Do you feel that? The ordinary world, sunlight, the scrape of a hive tool, shifts toward a single direction.
Find somewhere dark, put your headphones on, and listen closely now. I'm Sam Nong. This is Nature's Dread. Tonight's story is called Waggle Map. Her name is June, retired teacher, morning tea drinker, the sort of person who hums while she works and collects old postcards in a wooden box. She kept bees because she loved how the hives made summer sound, an orchestral hum, soft and constant. 3 wooden boxes on a sloped backyard, a line of raspberry bushes, a cherry tree that drooped each June with under-ripened fruit. The apiary had rhythms, inspections at dawn, frames lifted like pages turned, sweat drying on her neck. And then, one morning, a worker's waggle stood out like a single precise sentence in a crowded conversation.
At first, she shrugged. Bees repeat dances. A good forage patch will be advertised until everyone knows where to go. Maybe a neighboring field bloomed. Maybe a farmer had opened a new patch of buckwheat. She scribbled the angle on the page and moved on. But the dance repeated across days. Different workers, different frames, the same vector. She began sketching bearings right on top of each other until a faint ridge line emerged through the graphite. 3 kilometers away, tree-lined, quiet.
The first strange match was small, an old search perimeter for a missing woman from 28 years ago. Not an address, not coordinates, just a faded note and a ring of land that once hosted flashlights and shouting volunteers. The beekeeper laid her sketches over a topographic map and felt the hair on her arms stand up. If you were alone with this feeling, if you had the same line coming from the mouths of 100 tiny messengers, what would you do?
She rationalized, of course. She trusted science. Bees point to flowers, to water, to things they can eat. They are not oracles. Maybe the ridge had a stand of late-blooming heather. Maybe a solar farm had turned a field into something new. Still, she sketched more carefully. She began to document date, time, which frame, which worker ID, the angle measured relative to the sun. The pattern was stubborn. On some days, the hive was noisy and random. On others, the vector surfaced like a ghost line. The bee world kept repeating the same instruction.
And here's where things change. She did something quiet and deliberate. She reached out to experts. Not a sensational post, not a public map splashed on a forum. She called an apiologist who knew Waggle syntax, a behavioral ecologist who could speak to bias and recruitment, and a search and rescue coordinator who could tell her exactly how tips become investigations. Each voice pulled at a different corner of the same cloth, and together they showed how fragile a link between animal signals and human action can be.
The apiologist, calm, meticulous, said this: bees encode direction relative to the sun and distance in the vigor and duration of the waggle. Direction can be precise, yes, but it's statistical. One dance is a suggestion. Many dances together begin to look like a vector. Distance estimates are noisy, influenced by landscape and the bee's own energy. She told June not to treat the hive as a map, but as a clustering of observations worth noting. Pay attention to the details, she said, and meant the method as much as the bees.
The behavioral ecologist offered a different caution. Animals can show collective bias. A single attractive scent at a rendezvous point, a patch of familiar vegetation, or a momentary microclimate
can draw recruitment that looks meaningful to human eyes. Sometimes what seems like an intentional pointing is actually the hive following a strong local cue. She emphasized humility. Nature has patterns. Humans have meaning-making habits. We see intention where there might be none.
The search and rescue coordinator, practical, steady, spoke in procedures. A tip is a start, not a verdict. If an amateur claims a vector from bees, the right response is verification. Do not trespass. Do not mobilize volunteers based on a sketch. Document thoroughly, and contact official channels with anonymized, corroborated evidence. He worried about fence line confrontations, about well-meaning people scouring sensitive habitats. The coordinator's mantra was simple. Curiosity can become duty, but duty must include restraint.
June listened. She could have posted the map online that night and watched the internet crowd her ridge with strangers and flashlights, but she didn't. She brought her sketches to a university lab where a grad student translated the dances into spectrograms, visual representations of movement and timing. The pattern persisted, but the lab found plausible environmental triggers: a stand of late-blooming heather, underground springs shaping plant communities, a windbreak that concentrated a scent. The bees may have been advertising a resource, not pointing at a human secret. And then June made the choice that eliminates the easy story. She called the SAR coordinator. She handed over a packet, sketches, dates, lab notes, and asked how to proceed. The coordinator thanked her, logged the information, and then did what good coordinators do. They looked for independent corroboration. Historical records were checked, volunteers were not sent on a rumor, and the family connected to the old missing person case was contacted with care by professionals. No dramatic midnight expedition, no viral map, just process.
And then came the night walk. The climax, if you want to call it that, though the feeling was quieter than dramatic. June and a small official team approached the ridge with headlamps and soft steps. She carried only her sketches. The world was all sound and close breath, pine needles underfoot, the distant bugle of a night bird, her own heartbeat catching when the beam of the headlamp hit a tangle of roots. It mattered that the team moved like investigators, not vigilantes. There was tension, hope folded with obligation, but also an insistence on care.
They found signs, old campsites, a rusted can, a patch of flattened grass that might have been a sleeping spot decades ago. Nothing definitive. The ridge kept its secrets. The search confirmed that the bees had been pointing toward a patch of late nectar and a microhabitat that sustained certain wildflowers. The scientific reassessment suggested a plausible natural explanation. Still, the emotional ripple remained. Families were reminded. An old case was reopened thoughtfully by authorities. June lived with the feeling that her hives had interrupted a long, silent history. Afterwards, the science report landed like a careful hand. Bees are acute sensors, not interpreters of human loss. They can point, cluster, and guide, but they do so for their own needs. The team recommended further study, not headlines. June learned the difference between noticing and deciding for others. The family, contacted with sensitivity and supported by professionals, felt heard but not exploited. The community learned how fragile this work is. One wrong post, one misinterpreted diagram, and good intent becomes harm.
Now listen closely. The final image is simple. One page of sketches, dozens of faint vectors layered like the rings of a tree. From the outside, it looks like a map with meaning. From the inside, it is a record of care. Notes, dates, a decision to consult rather than declare. I'll leave the rest ambiguous. Are the bees a clue, a coincidence, or the intersection of both? The answer sits in the space between human hope and natural explanation. If you've ever read a pattern into a cloud or a rumor into a shadow, you know the feeling June had.
attention turning into a responsibility that must be managed with humility. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who listens in the dark. Subscribe so you never miss an episode. And, until next time, check the corners.